Well, I think for wrestling fans, it's really, and especially Pennsylvania wrestling fans, it's one of the most wonderful times of the year. It is time for the national tournament. Almost time in Philadelphia, Wells Fargo Center. Bob Flounders here with Jim Carlson, recording this a couple days ahead of it, Jimmy. We were both up in State College a little bit earlier this week. Got to hear from Kale Sanderson and a couple of his wrestlers, Tyler Kasek, Lightning Luke Lillidahl. I just love that nickname. I don't know why. It just flows so naturally. And really the man of the moment, right? Carter Starocci going for number 5, unprecedented in NCAA history. I think we never really, we just assumed, Jimmy, that people understand. So he got the red shirt coming out of Erie Cathedral Prep, and then he got the COVID year, right? That really kind of didn't count. So it enabled Carter to stay in school a little bit, perfect his craft, but he is in line. He's the number 1 seed at 184 pounds in the tournament. He's in line to go for 5. No one's really been able to slow him down. Jimmy, I just want to start with this, though. I remember we started this PennLive Wrestling podcast, and it does not seem that long ago that we were talking about your trip to the PP&L Center and Penn State Lehigh, and you had a really interesting story about how you were able to corner Kale Sanderson kind of backstage to get him to talk after the match, because sometimes he doesn't want to talk to everyone after the match. I believe it was a Sunday match, but it doesn't seem that long ago to me. I really feel like the season's gone by pretty fast.
Well, it has. And I was going to say the same thing to you, that it feels like a week or two ago, it was the All-Star match in November, recall. I mean, another, 5-month season, and it's hard to believe this Saturday night in Philly, it's going to be all over. And when it ends, Bob, what will have happened, right? Will Penn State have won its 4th straight title and 12th in the past 14 tournaments? Will Penn State place 10 All-Americans? How many champions will Penn State have? How many finalists will they have? And will any of the news from the upcoming 3 days not have to do with Penn State? On that, I can guarantee you there will be plenty of other news that you don't expect, things you can't believe, upsets, maybe a few officials' calls that just shouldn't happen. It's all part of the event in a jam-packed Wells Fargo Center.
Yeah. Jimmy, we got a lot to get to because we really had interesting comments from the 3 wrestlers and from Cael. I just thought it was a little bit interesting. You could tell Cael is always locked in, but I think 1 week out or a couple days away from the tournament that he wants to have his guys peaking at, he is extra locked in. The reason I know that is it was a pretty big media contingent up at the Rec Hall media room, and he wouldn't really bite on some interesting, maybe some color questions. He was asked a little bit about kind of the first time in Philly, if you knew then what you know now, like, how would you feel about that? I mean, what would you say about that first one now, looking back with all that you've accomplished? He was also asked about one of his former wrestlers, David Taylor, who's now the Oklahoma State head coach, and he very politely said, well, I don't really follow that stuff in season. I'm all about my Penn State guys. But Cael is locked in. His wrestlers are locked in. We can start in a lot of different directions, and we certainly were going to get to Carter and Luke and some other guys. But just real quick, his comments about Josh Barr, you're pretty good at probably interpreting Cael. This isn't this. There's a precedent here. Carter Starocci basically won a title last year on one leg. We don't know the extent of Josh Barr's injury. All we know is Cael said he's ready to let it fly on Thursday at a tough weight, 197 pounds. But you were at the Big Ten tournament. Did you read it into anything that Cael had to say about maybe Josh Barr's status?
Not really, except as you said, talking about Starocci, he said the same thing last year that Carter would be ready to go. He didn't really say he'd be wrestling on one leg, but he sort of had to figure out that he would, and he did. And of course, he always credits the trainer Dan Monthly. We don't know what Barr's injury is. It's the left leg. When he injured himself going out of bounds with Isaiah Salazar, he started jumping up and down, like sort of trying to shake it off.
Right.
So you would think there's some things you could rule out when guys doing that, but I really don't know. I've heard it is not a knee. Whether that's true, we'll have to see. But that leaves ankle, calf, and hammy, right? So, you can't speculate. It just, you do have to. I certainly don't think it's going to be Nick, what's his name?
Suriano?
Thank you. Soriano
You're welcome,
situation where
Jimmy. You're welcome.
he pulls out the day before. Yeah, that I don't think that'll happen at all.
Yeah, well, he didn't really want to talk too much about the first time around in Philly, but you have some perspective on that. I think you might have it might have been you. Somebody asked him about, the moment. I think it was the Quentin Wright match that kind of paved the way for that first team championship, the first of many. But he did talk about it a little bit. He didn't want to he's just so focused on this team. But what are your memories maybe about that first Philadelphia experience?
Well, it was funny what he said. Quentin Wright's fall in the semifinals. I was Grant Gambrell, and Gambrell had beaten Quentin 8-3 in the dual meet, and it was a solid 8-3. It wasn't a fluke 8-3. And I don't remember the score of the match at the time. I think it was pretty close, but they were in neutral, and Wright clamped a standing cradle on Gambrell, pinned him near the edge of the mat, and the place just went crazy. And that's what Cael said yesterday, that, sort of brought a smile to his face. And he said that's when they thought that they were winning over Iowa and Cornell. And he said he called it pretty darn special. He said he was in college a long time before he was on a championship team. And he said his dad was a high school coach. So you grow up knowing and feeling that team is always first and foremost. Individual stuff is great, but we're a team. We've got to win as a team. That's the most important thing. And so taking quite a few years to actually be a part of a team championship as coaches, it was a pretty cool thing. And I remember speaking even to his assistants then, Cody and Casey, Cody Sanderson, Casey Cunningham, and how thrilled they were, at the time, and just what it meant to them to do this in 2 years. That's what they did. So, yeah, it was sort of cool to be around.
Yeah. And, given what they've accomplished since then, it just feels to me like the Penn State wrestling fan base is just, it's become, the first time he did it, you were like, well, was this just one of those years where everything, came together for him? But that certainly has not been the case. It's just been more of the same. They are a machine. And I think the Penn State fan base will be very well represented down in Philadelphia. It should be a really interesting environment and loud. As you said, Penn State is trying to become one of the few teams that have had 10 All-Americans, an All-American at all 10 weights. It is not easy to do. It will not be easy for Penn State to do this weekend, even though they're that talented. They do have 4 number 1 seeds. They have a couple wrestlers that are not seeded number 1 that could absolutely win their weights. But, if Josh Barr is able to kind of finish the tournament, if Braden Davis is feeling better, like Cael said he is, and he expects him to take a step forward, I think, Jimmy, you think that they have a pretty realistic shot at having 10 All-Americans.
I do. And those are the 2 key weights, as you just mentioned, with 33 and 97. And they're both rugged weights, right? So Barr, you have to hope that both are healthy, that both navigate the first couple of rounds, because that's the key. You get to the quarterfinal round and you're not guaranteed a place, but you end up in the blood round where you control your own destiny. And you win that and you're guaranteed of 8th. So, it was a story on PennLive today. I had asked Tyler Kasek about it, but I had spoken with the Minnesota coach a couple weeks ago, and he said he doesn't think about it much, but it is very unique, very difficult, obviously, since this happened once since 1928, and that if it doesn't happen, he said there will be Gopher alumni all over, smiling, sort of like the 72 Miami Dolphins. I think I might have said that last week.
Yeah.
The last undefeated team. Gopher alumni smiling that it lasted another year, but he thinks eventually, with the new rules coming and all, there'll be super teams, and you can buy, as he said, you can buy wrestlers now. You can fill holes easier. And he thinks it will be broken, or not broken, but equaled with them. But because it's so difficult to do, that there is a chance that it won't happen as well.
Yeah, yeah. We're moving along right here on the PennLive Wrestling Podcast. Focus is on the national tournament in Penn State this week. We've done a bunch of these this year. We've also had some interesting guests. It's going to be about Pennsylvania wrestling as well when we get the opportunity. But if we're talking about the NCAA tournament and you consider what Penn State under Cael has been able to do, they are, I mean, they're going to be, they're really kind of like rock stars right now, just because of how they've ascended in the sport, because of all the wrestlers that they have. And I think, Jimmy, I don't know about you, I just feel like there isn't a bigger storyline than Carter, just because no one else has done it. He's not a shoo-in to do it because it's the national tournament, but the way that he's been wrestling, boy, somebody got close to him in the Big Ten tournament, and the guy made one mistake, and Carter was ready for it. I think he might have set him up near the edge, won the match. That kid is tough. He's only going to get better, the Minnesota kid. But Carter had some very interesting comments to say on Monday. He was asked a lot of questions. The one thing I wanted to ask of you is just your perspective on what, not number 5, but number 4, what he was able to do last year at 174 on one leg. And he actually was asked about that. And I just want to get into that and have you comment on it, Jimmy. So he won the weight last year, but he did say that trying to do that while cutting weight and wrestling in a very tough field, he said on Monday that, after his first couple of matches being on one leg, it was a rough go. He said, I said to myself, I'm paraphrasing, man, this isn't fun. And he said he had his head down in the locker room, and he was just trying to kind of maybe, I think, summon some, just summon some strength and try and find a reason to kind of keep going. And, hey, how am I going to do this on one leg? And he said, that's when Kale Sanderson kind of stepped in and actually kind of gave him a reality check. I don't want to say, you don't call out Carter Starocci, but he just said, Cael came up to him, and here's the quote. He was like, you're still the baddest dude in this arena. And Cael was like, you can win this thing on one leg, but it's going to be hard to do that on one leg and a bad attitude. And Cael said, you need to change that attitude around and let's get after it. I think it was day 2, or maybe it was the final day. And Carter said, I was cutting weight that night, and I was really thinking about what Cael said. I slept on it. He said he woke up, and he said he had a whole different attitude, a new perspective. And he said, Cael was right. We could control our attitude, and so let's make sure we do that. And I just think, number 1, to do it on one leg, and number 2, to kind of do that in mid-tournament and then go on and win it. I just think that's got to be one of the most incredible Penn State wrestling stories of all time. And you were there for it. Just your thoughts on what he had to say about Cael stepping in, kind of bringing it to his attention that, hey, he needed to get his head on straight. He needed to do it right now. And it speaks to the respect that Cael has, that Carter's like, you know what? Because I don't think Carter listens to everyone, but he listens to Cael. And I just think that for him to kind of admit it, he needed a reality check. He needed an attitude check. And he went out and won.
Well, they were each of the 3 was asked about Cael yesterday, and just how he prepares them and all. And of course, Carter told that story. And what happened last year was amazing. He was seeded 9th because he did not get out of the Big Ten tournament. He got out with 2 medical forfeits. So that put 2 losses on his record officially, when really he's won 90 matches in a row. But the record won't show that because of those 2 losses in the Big Ten. So he gets to the Nationals, and he won the first one fairly easily, but then he had to beat, like I said, 2 NCAA champs. And then in the final, I believe it was 2-0 with Rocco Welsh, who did not wrestle this year for Ohio State. He always knew where he was on the mat. He always knew where that leg was. We talked about this, and I think I said this recently as well, when I spoke with him last October. His mat IQ is just off the charts. And so, but if you look at last week, I really think he was out of position when he got taken down, and you don't see that. And I can guarantee you it won't happen this week. His leg was right there for McNally. It was like a turkey breast, and the guy just dove in on it. And it was a great takedown. Carter could not defend it. But then, he got his own at the mat's edge against McAnally. And then, like I said, he baited him sort of overtime into a straight-on shot, pushed him down, and got around him and go behind him very quickly. And that's how he wrestles. That's just how smart he is.
Yeah. So, yeah, he if you throw those 2 defaults out, you're 90 90 matches in a row. I think we both noted he has 99 career wins going into the tournament. One other thing is I think that also gets overlooked is this wrestling in college, cutting weight, all that stuff. After you've done it in high school, it's a challenge. It's physically grinding, it's mentally grinding. And Carter, he talked about finishing, I think he finished 8th as a freshman in the Pennsylvania prep tournament for Erie Cathedral. And I looked it up just to get some of the details. And that was the 2015, I think 2016 high school season. And that's almost 10 years ago. And this is his, when you think about his redshirt year at Penn State and the COVID year, this is his 6th year of collegiate wrestling in a very physical sport. The demands of that, I think, that to me is impressive as well. For him to be that locked in for that long of a time and to do it with an injury, to do it, with everyone kind of gunning for him, taking on all comers, just very impressive. But he's a Pennsylvania prep kid. And I think we both noted last week, courtesy of, I think it was Pennsylvania Power or Flow, they came up with the number. There's 41 wrestlers in this field that wrestled at Pennsylvania high schools. And that's just another extraordinary number. And I know you have some more numbers you want to get to.
Well, the 41 is interesting because it many, many times, in fact, almost always, it was in the mid-50s. So I'd sort of like to see, whether that is the declining population in the western part of the state or whatever it is. I'd sort of like to know why. Mm-hmm. But it's down to 41. However, with Tyler Casack and Starocci both earning number 1 seeds, so the Keystone State does have a pair of number 1s, right? So to go with that overall 41. But, Penn State has had 38 champions since 2011 out of 56 finalists. And the record in the semifinals since 2011, 56-8. Okay, I mean, that's just staggering. And if you break it down in the past 8 years, 35-4 in the semifinals since 2017. How many will they have in the semis this year? That will be the question. Could it be? I think it's a minimum of 6, and it certainly could be more. And again, as we spoke last week, I think you will notice, even though it would be a pro Penn State crowd, there will still be plenty of pockets of other people coming from around the country, and you'll know when somebody from Penn State loses because the decibels are amped up when someone from Penn State loses.
The PennLive Wrestling Podcast talking about the Nationals at the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia a little bit later this week. We're recording this late Tuesday morning, the day after St. Patty's Day. We both survived St. Patty's Day. Good on us, Jimmy. But we'll both be in Philly. Looking forward to it. Thursday through Saturday. Penn State going for yet another national title, capping an undefeated regular season. Cruised pretty easily through the Big Tens. They got 4 number 1 seeds. Carter's going for number 5. Why don't we just kind of go through some of the weights, some of your thoughts? I think you're going to be doing. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I believe you might be doing some predicting on PennLive a little bit prior to the tournament. I don't want to spoil anything, but why don't you give us some of your thoughts maybe on some of the individual weights and where the Penn State kids are?
All right. Well, we started at the top, and Luke Littledahl, who was in the room yesterday, very confident, said he thinks he is better than the field. And, he got the number 1 seed. Now he has to prove it, right? And Cael said Littledahl is going to keep getting better. He says if he has the right energy, the right mindset, he's very coachable, loves to compete. Obviously really good at the sport, really talented in addition to those things. So he's a student of the game. And he says that's why you're seeing him with the right perspective and the energy and the attitude. I think Littledahl is the complete package, the strength, obviously the quickness, a lot of mat savvy, not quite at Starocci's level yet, but you couldn't expect him to do that. But even he said, he's been on the world stage, winning U20 titles, things like that. So he doesn't think that, because of that, he doesn't think there'll be a lot of pressure on him. He'll have to be very sharp against Nebraska's Caleb Smith in I believe, the quarterfinals. He's had 2 close matches with him. Last week at the Big Ten tournament, I walked past Mark Manning and Caleb Smith just after the match, and Manning was showing him some moves and all, how he could combat perhaps Lillard's ankle pick that he had on him, but that pick was so quick that nobody could have defended that one. But he also, he'll either face Richie Figueroa, last year's champion, got to think about that, or freshman Vince Robinson of North Carolina State in the semifinals. And both those guys will provide strong challenges. I believe that his half of the bracket is more difficult than the bottom half. And it could well be he'll be facing Matt Ramos again in Purdue in the finals. So we'll see if that happens.
Yeah, Jimmy, a couple things struck me about Luke. He is feeling his oats right now. I think some of the setbacks he had, not that there were many in the regular season, only benefited him. I think he learned from them. I think he got a little not humbled, but I mean, it's like it's not going to be super easy. But the way that he bounced back was impressive. I think the win over Ramos and how he did it at Big Tens also did wonders for his confidence. But yeah, what struck me was he wasn't even really asked a pointed question, but he was like, yeah, I just can't. I don't know if it's because he's been hanging out with Starocci and all the world champs in the wrestling room, but he's like, yeah, he basically said, I think I'm on a different level than these guys. And he might very well be. He also, I thought, he is, I think he is enjoying and relishing the chance to wrestle somebody else other than Big Ten wrestlers, because he's seen a lot of these guys a couple of times, or he knows them very well. They know him very well. And I think he's looking forward to expanding his horizons out in Philadelphia.
Well, he did say that because he wrestled everybody in the Big Ten tournament before, except for Ramos. But, he's going to get him again, just not early, right? The first couple rounds, he'll have other guys. But, they're coming at him again from the Big Ten. So, then we look at 133, Davis, the 8th seed, a key factor, as we said earlier, whether Penn State places all 10. He faces Bucknell's Kurt Phipps. He's a competitive Pittsburgh kid from Norwin. Problem being the 8th seed is you get number 9 in the second round and number 1 in the quarterfinals, right? So he's beaten number 9 Braxton Brown of Maryland, Big Ten. Tough matchup. And then number 1, Lucas Bird, Big Ten, who handled him in the dual meet. So he needs to get to those quarterfinals against Bird and then win 2 more matches to ensure a place. Cael talked about Davis, losing close matches, and said that details and little things matter and that Davis knows that. But health-wise, as you said earlier, he's better now than he's been and just has to decide that it's his day and go score points. I always like how he says that. It's just, hey, you just got to go do it.
Yeah. Jimmy, I think when you look at this tournament and you look at Penn State's top to bottom lineup, if we're not talking about Carter and we're not talking about Josh Barr's health, I think what happens at 141 and 140 for Penn State, given how good those kids are, but how the Big Ten championships did not go their way, and they might have even surprised you a little bit. I think that is one of the pivot points for Penn State and how many points they're going to get and how impressive they're going to be in semifinals and how many champs they could have. Bo Bartlett and Shane Van Ness are elite wrestlers. Easily, they could win their weights. But it did not go their way in Evanston. And, you never really know how wrestlers are going to respond. But usually Cael and his staff get them going in the right direction. They're probably more motivated than ever. But I just think it's very interesting that those 2 guys, I was a little surprised that I thought Bo was going to win his weight, and I thought Shane had a great shot in Big Tens. But I just think how it goes for them maybe early in this tournament is going to say a lot about how Penn State's entire tournament's going to go.
I think that's exactly right, and they will be very key to whether Penn State can break its own scoring record. 72.5 last year, I believe. Bartlett, he gets he's a 2 seed. So if he gets past guys like Joey Oliveri from Rutgers and Oklahoma State's Tegan Jamison, then it's probably Jesse Mendez again for the 7th time in his career in the semifinals on Friday night. And he's had 2 straight over Mendez, though. So it does appear he's shown the ability to finish shots against Mendez, and he seems to have solved Mendez's excellent defensive counters as well. Then there's Brock Hardy, waiting in the finals. Maybe. There's also 2023 champ Andrew Ramirez of Northern Colorado in the quarters, who's the 8th seed. And so, it all, and plus with Cael Happel from Northern Iowa, the 4 seed is Navy's Josh Coderhant, where Kerry Collette's coaching. Clearly, though, I mean, the finals can go either way, but Bartlett seems to be zoned in. Then Van Ness, he beat Caleb Henson in the 2023 tournament on the backside, coming back for third place. It's not easy for Van Ness in the first round. It could be Chance Leamer, Cal Poly, Lachlan McNeil, who was a high school teammate of Bartlett's from UNC. Sammy Alvarez, a rider, possibly in the quarterfinals. And I think I saw Alvarez and Gable Stevenson in the Social Security office a couple weeks ago. They've just been around so long. And I think Van Ness can navigate through all that and make the finals. What he does against Henson is up to his game this year. So that'll be very interesting.
Yeah. PennLive's Wrestling Podcast looking at the NCAA tournament in Philadelphia. Penn State going for their 12th team championship, heavily favored to do so. There is a lot of, it never plays out the way you want to script it. Even best case scenario, there's going to be some adversity. There's going to be some surprises. I don't know how many champs they're going to have, but Carter's chase for a 5th title. Lightning Luke maybe starting a run of his own if he can do some damage as a freshman at 125. We just talked about Bo and Shane. There's a couple of weights left with some really, really good kids, like really, really good kids. We're almost a half an hour into this podcast. We haven't mentioned much about Tyler Cael. What Mitchell's been able to do this year has been just fantastic. Levi Haynes going for, continuing to fill out. I think Cael even acknowledged he might not be the biggest kid at his weight, but he is no fun to wrestle. You got those guys. You got Josh, and you got the heavyweight who any other year against anyone else but maybe the number 1 seed at heavyweight would be looking real good to repeat as an NCAA champion. So out of all those weights, where do you want to go next?
Well, let's look at Haynes.
Okay.
Just because Keegan O'Toole has been around just like Starocci has and has a couple of titles. If it weren't for David Carr, he might have 4 titles. He jumped up from 65 this year. He beat Haynes in Nashville.
4-1?
In December, 4-1 in Sun Victory, right? And I say, Bob, that this match is 4-1 the other way.
Okay.
Whether it's Sun Victory or regulation, we won't go that far. But I just think that Haynes, with his strength, his match savvy, not that O'Toole doesn't have it because he truly does. Mm-hmm. But after that match in Nashville, O'Toole did not wrestle again till the last dooming of the season, late February, and then the Big 12. So, that can be good, that can be bad. I think it will not work in his favor against Haynes. That's my guess.
Yeah, and I really hope we get to see that bout. Like we should get to see it. You don't know if you're going to get to see it. We talked about Josh Barr, and I think we talked about his injury. So Tyler Cael is a guy that is, I feel like he is almost like Carter Starocci in training with the way that he wrestles, how he views competition, what his goal is, just to smash as many people as he can. Tough kid. His only loss this year was an injury default. He was winning. And he talked about he won 7 matches in a row last year to get 3rd after things didn't go his way. In his first match, in a surprise. He's locked in as well. 2 things I wanted to ask you about. One was Cael kind of acknowledging, I think what you realize and what a lot of Penn State wrestling fans realize is, with Mitchell at 65, he's had a dominant run, and early in the season or for most of the regular season, anyone who wanted to tangle with him, he was just going to score points in flurries on them. And now, I think the second time he wrestled the Iowa kid, it was 4-1. And Cael kind of said, "Look, now the challenge for Mitchell is you got guys trying to slow him down rather than maybe than just trying to go with him from neutral. It's kind of a different ball game." Just your thoughts on that, and also what you thought about Carter's thoughts on the Minnesota heavyweight and whether it was beatable or not, because Carter's Kirkfleet's got his hands full, but I just thought it was funny that Carter thought he was beatable, but it's not really on Carter to try and beat him. He's not the one that's got to try.
Well, first, Messenbrink, as you said, Cael talking about how people are defending him a little bit better now. That also, I believe, will put Messenbrink in another gear. I think you'll see a lot of tech falls early on. Now, I'm not saying he'll tech his way through the tournament, but he is, in my book, he is the biggest favorite in the entire tournament, even more so than just a bit of a step ahead of Stevenson. As far as those are the two heavy favorites. As Cael said, Mitchell trying to get better, continue to separate himself. He said that's what makes the whole tournament and the whole season worthwhile. As far as Starocci saying that Stevenson was beatable, he gave Kirkfleet a pep talk the other day. He says, he puts his arm around him and says, dude, he says, if you can beat this guy, you will live your life. Your life will be on a different level. You'll be living better the rest of your life for beating this guy. So I'm sure Kirkfleet probably smiled as much as Kirkfleet smiles. But yeah, that was a pep talk I would like to hear.
Yeah, it is easier. I shouldn't say easier said than done, but it's gonna be. If he can do, hey, look, it was done before by a Penn State kid, but it's good luck. I say good luck. Anything is possible. I think Cael probably believes it too, but the margin for error against a kid like that is so slim that, boy, you just almost have to wrestle a perfect match, I think, to probably even have a shot at that, maybe in the final minute. Jimmy, before we wrap up the PennLive Wrestling Podcast here ahead of the NCAA tournament in Philadelphia, Wells Fargo, Thursday through Saturday. We'll both be there. I alluded to the fact that check out PennLive Wrestling fans. He's going to have some thoughts on, I think, every finals matchup. Do you see, even if you don't want to mention the wrestler by name, do you see a potential surprise result maybe in the finals? And is there anything do you have any bold predictions or semi-bold predictions? I mean, you kind of went there with Haynes. Any semi-bold predictions about Penn State wrestlers in the tournament?
Penn State wrestlers?
You don't have to.
Whether they all go chalk is I'm not sure. We already talked about 41 and 49. They can both win. They can both not emerge victorious either. I mean, that's how tough it is. I think at 197, I mean, bar's very difficult weight. I think you will hear a lot of derision directed toward AJ Ferrari from Cal State Bakersfield just because of his past. Fair or not, we'll see. But he is a stud. He is flexible. He does splits. He flexes himself. But he could win that weight at 197 over Cardenas, over Buchanan, he won't face all them, over Barr. That could happen. Although he's sort of ducked a couple guys this year, but I think, he will really want to come out of that weight class.
All right, Jimmy, one last thing. At the end of Saturday night, will Penn State have All-Americans at all 10 weights? Am I putting you on the spot? I love putting you on the spot.
Bob, I think they will. I think they will. I think Davis will be. I think he'll be coaching staff project in this one, and he'll have to have 5, 6, 7 matches where he's on mentally, and you can't let down in this tournament, and he did last year. He gave up a late score to Richie Figs in the quarterfinals. He lost to I think Cael said yesterday he lost on 10 seconds of riding time, maybe on Jor Volk of Wyoming on the backside. So those are the things he has to eliminate. Barr, you have to believe that he's going to be healthy enough to at least, maybe place 5 through 8 somewhere in there. That still counts. Minnesota did that with no champions. All their guys, when they placed in 2001, are from 3rd through 8th, no champs. So just because it's unique and tough to do, that's what sort of Penn State is known for these days. I think they're going to do it.
All right, Jimmy. I just looked at the timer. We worked overtime. I think we were in sudden victory to finish this PennLive Wrestling Podcast. I think we inadvertently went live. It's listing me as Chris Hopkins. I'm Bob Flounders with Jim Carlson, talking about the national NCAA championships in Philadelphia this week. Ahead of it, we'll both be out there covering Penn State and the Pennsylvania kids. Jimmy, I know you're looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it as well. Jimmy, I'm also looking forward to next week, maybe spending some time with you to kind of recap what we thought, but it's sure shaping up to be a pretty incredible 3 days, capped by Saturday night.
There's nothing like it, and you probably haven't been there in a while. It's a great event. It's a great event.
All right, guys, we'll be back next week to talk about what we learned.